This presentation has been prepared for small business consultants who are interested in pursuing upcoming opportunities in the next two phases of the I-94 Advanced Bridges program. The workshop will discuss how to prepare to develop a responsive, qualifications-based proposal. If you have not yet downloaded the presentation materials, the workshop materials, including all handouts, now would be a good time to do that. If you need to do that, please press pause and then resume once you have the materials at hand. During this workshop, we will organize ourselves accordingly. First, we'll review MDOT'S procurement processes. Then we'll do an exercise to kind of warm us up a little bit and introduce us to a responsive proposal. We will review the sample RFP from your workbook. Then we will do two additional exercises, one entitled Writing for Value, and then exercise 3, Checking for Value. Then we'll review some best practices for QBS proposals, show you where to go for more information as we wrap it up. Are you ready? Here we go. Our goals for your learning are as follows. First, we hope that you will gain an understanding of how MDOT procures services generally and where to find information on MDOT procurements and processes. We hope you understand MDOT service vendor requirements better and small business enterprise RFPs more specifically. We would like you to come away with a better understanding of what constitutes a responsive proposal, and we want you to be better prepared to submit a responsive and competitive proposal for the I-94 SBE program. So first, let's do an overview of MDOT RFPs. 3 principles that we want you to remember and apply in this process are reading for understanding, organize for success, and ask the right questions. The 3 workshop exercises are designed to give you some practice in applying these 3 principles. In your workbook reference material, there's an important reference document that we will be referring to throughout this presentation. It's MDOT's Selection Guidelines for Service Contracts. If you have printed out the workshop material, it will be behind the Reference tab or in the part of the reference documents in that download. It's the MDOT Bible for service contracts. And so most of what we are covering here today is referenced in this document in some way. It can be found online along with a host of other resources. So let me show you where that link is. This is MDOT's website for consultant services, and the URL and the screenshot are noted here on the presentation. There's a tremendous amount of information on this website. If you want to do business with MDOT, you need to become familiar with this website. So how does MDOT procure services? Since a significant majority of MDOT's funding comes from federal sources, MDOT's engineering service contract process is anchored in federal law. The common name for the federal statute covering the contracting of engineering services is the Brooks Act. This act requires that services of an architectural or engineering nature must be procured via a qualifications-based process. This basically means that price cannot be involved in the selection of engineering services. And this goes for the upcoming work in the I-94 Advanced Bridges projects. Service providers will be selected on the basis of their qualifications to do the work. And then MDOT will seek to contract with those that are selected. Now, we will not be covering the contracting process in this workshop, just the proposal phase. And so again, this workshop is for Brooks Act qualifications-based proposals, and specifically small business enterprise proposals with no pre-qualification required. So what is a request for proposal, or RFP? Let's talk generally about these RFPs. First of all, we anticipate that many of you reviewing this presentation may have never responded to an MDOT RFP before. That's the assumption that we're making. So this is really a fundamental presentation on how MDOT does this. So MDOT issues a request for proposal, and then companies respond, each with their own proposal. Then those proposals are evaluated according to established or developed criteria, and a selection is made. It sounds easy, but it can get a little confusing and complicated. And so that's why we're taking the time with this presentation to try to unpack this for you a little bit, so you can be better prepared to respond to the next round of opportunities that are coming on I-94. So I want to explain the concept of responsive proposals. And this is so important, we're going to work together on this. But again, let's review. The RFP is a formal contract procurement step. It identifies both administrative requirements for procurement and technical requirements for the work. And then this notion of a responsive proposal. This is where the agency determines that the proposal has met applicable requirements and will be reviewed and evaluated. So what does a responsive proposal look like? As we noted in the previous slide, a responsive proposal is one that meets all applicable requirements, that's kind of a mouthful, and therefore is eligible to be reviewed and evaluated. So what would you think would be some of the requirements of a responsive proposal? Why don't you hit the pause button and write down some ideas on a piece of paper while I wait. So if you've written down some ideas about what a responsive proposal might be, keep those handy and we'll review those in a little bit. We want to start with this form, and when you're dealing, of course, with MDOT processes, there's always going to be forms. And so this form here, and it's in your presentation materials, this form 5100B is an important form for the RFP process. We've provided a blank form, again, in your materials, and you'll also see this form filled out in the sample RFP. But for now, let's just look at the blank form. There's important information here on the procurement details. This form is the first 2 pages of a standard MDOT service contract RFP. So we're going to go through this a little bit, and then, as I said, we'll show you a sample that's filled out. So this form includes basic procurement data, general and specific proposal requirements, and general information on the selection process. This form is used by the MDOT project manager to initiate the selection process, and it provides some guidance to consultant proposers on how to respond. So a couple of points. First, only electronic proposals may be submitted. The email address is provided, and that's what's highlighted in blue about 2/3 of the way down this page. It is the consultant's responsibility to get this proposal submitted on time. And you'll note at the top, again, that the general information on the solicitation, there's spaces for that, including the requisition number, the date that it's due, the time that it's due, the description of the service, some MDOT programming information, the general description, and that sort of thing. That's at the top of the form. Also on this form, MDOT informs potential proposers that DBEs are encouraged to apply, and if there are DBEs on the team, they shall be listed in the proposal. And then there's another important piece toward the bottom of the form. MDOT forms required as part of the proposal submission. And these are forms 5100D and 5100J if the services procured are non-pre-qualified services. So we'll go through these forms shortly. Page 2 of Form 5100B provides generic RFP requirements and some specific information to interested proposers on the requirements to respond. Some key points here. Pre-qualified versus non-pre-qualified services. This refers to the attached scope of services for any required pre-qualification classifications. It's important to note which of these boxes are checked. The vast majority of MDOT solicitations for engineering services are for pre-qualified consultants only. This means they have qualified themselves both technically and financially and are experienced doing work for MDOT. Some of the solicitations, however, do not require technical pre-qualification. MDOT will evaluate the vendor's qualifications to perform the work solely on the basis of the proposal contents. Also, the type of selection process is identified here. For our purposes in this workshop, we are going to focus on the first type, qualifications-based selection. Now, in terms of pre-qualification, it is important to remember the distinction between being technically pre-qualified and financially pre-qualified. All firms seeking to do business with MDOT must be financially pre-qualified. The process for accomplishing this is not the subject of this workshop. If your firm is not yet financially pre-qualified to do business with MDOT and you would like to be, we recommend that you contact Mike MDOT at MDOT, and we've provided his contact information on the slide. There are also generic insurance requirements that are a part of most MDOT RFPs for engineering services. This is a boilerplate sheet that is usually part of each RFP. We'll not be covering these requirements in any detail today. Again, if you need assistance and support, Mike MDOT in Finance is your contact. Then there's another boilerplate requirement in most RFPs that refer to MDOT selection guidelines, refers to specific requirements for electronic submittals, and the general requirements of Part 4, along with important E-Verify requirements. So if you click on the link at the top of that page, then it takes you right back to those selection guidelines that we listed before. All right. Now, if you recall, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that there's some important forms that you need to understand and complete in order to submit a responsive proposal. And they were referenced in the first page of Form 5100B. Those two forms are shown here. Forms 5100D and 5100J. So again, we've got blank copies of these that are in your workbook. If you have downloaded those, take a look. If you haven't, hit the pause button, and it'd be helpful to have those two forms in front of you. The first one, the 5100D, is a 2-page form, and 5100J is a 3-page form. The 5100J form on the right is 3 pages and is required if the RFP page has the non-pre-qualified service box checked and your firm is performing non-pre-qualified services. These have to be filled out completely as part of your proposal. We have provided a sample proposal in your workbook that includes these sample forms filled out in response to our sample RFP. So we've given you an example of how these forms should be filled out. But it's important that they are filled out completely. So, you have those notes that you put down, some ideas on what a responsive QBS proposal looks like. You can compare them to some of the things that we've identified on this next slide. So you can check these against our do's and don'ts. So do include completed forms 5100D, the cover sheet, and 5100J if it's for non-pre-qualified services, including appropriate signatures. Don't submit it late. Do send the proposal electronically per the submittal requirements. Don't send any paper copies. Do contact the RFP designated person, usually that's the MDOT project manager, with any questions you might have. Don't send a file that's too large or has too many pages. Do make sure your company as prime and all your subs meet eligibility criteria for proposing: financial pre-qualification, technical pre-qualification, SBE or DBE certifications, etc. Don't assume your subs gave you correct information on their certification or pre-qualification status. Double check. You as the prime are responsible for everything on that proposal. Do include resumes for key staff if the RFP allows it, but make sure it is accurate and up to date with required and relevant data. Don't include resumes for non-key staff. We're going to be reviewing some of these in more detail as we work through the sample RFP and proposal. Now, again, what does an MDOT RFP look like? Speaking of our sample RFP, let's find that document in our workbook and take a look at it. So if you found it, then go ahead and take a few minutes to read through that sample RFP, working on our first principle of proposal writing, reading for understanding. Hit the pause button. I'll wait for you. So the first page of the sample RFP gives us another look at Form 5100B, but this time it's filled out. It's the first page, again, of that sample RFP. It provides critical information about this procurement opportunity: requisition number, date and time due, description of services, project manager, and the all-important requirements of the written proposal, identified by the checked boxes in the columns under the tiers. In this case, this sample is a solicitation for a Tier 3 requisition, requiring understanding of service, innovations, organizational chart, qualifications of team, and location. The double asterisk behind a couple of those elements means that those elements are optional at the PM's discretion. But here we can see which of these have been selected by the PM as being required in this solicitation. On the second page of the sample RFP, and again, this is a sample, not an actual RFP, we see the box checked Engineering Services, and also the box is checked No under Service Posted in the Anticipated RFPs. Now, you may recall MDOT's website that I referred to you a few minutes ago. If you become familiar with that website, you'll see that MDOT posts every quarter anticipated RFPs that are coming up in the next quarter. Sometimes when proposals are advertised, they're not listed on those anticipated listings. Sometimes they are. And so this form tells you whether it was listed or not. Often if proposals are not listed on that anticipated list, then proposers have a little more time to prepare proposals. And so that's why that box is there. But more importantly, the box is checked for non-pre-qualified services on this sample RFP. This means that Form 5100J will be required for this proposal, and that firms seeking to be selected will need to have certain financial information on file with MDOT along with any of their sub-consultants. This is very important. We can also see that the qualifications-based selections box is checked, and so that tracks with the engineering services. And so that means that MDOT's guidelines for QBS will be observed in the evaluation and selection for this solicitation. If you look at the other pages, 3 and 4 of this sample RFP, these are the same boilerplate sheets that we looked at before. Generic insurance requirements, and then the requirements for submitting the proposal electronically. Now we're going to go back in more detail on that whole electronic submittal, but I just want to sort of walk you through the sample RFP pages just as kind of an overview, so you can kind of see what this thing looks like. The next page of the RFP includes a provision for a small business program, and that's consistent with the description on the cover page. This requires each proposer to register as a small business within 30 days of the proposal due date. Note that if you are already certified as a DBE, you should already be registered as a small business with MDOT. Form 4106 for the small business application. We're not going to be going through this form in the workshop. It's referenced in this notice, but if you need help with this form, MDOT Office of Business Development staff is available to assist you. And on the website, you can find that contact information for help with Form 4106. The next page of the sample RFP is an important page because it clarifies non-boilerplate language, provides additional proposal information to be scored. This is not boilerplate, so this is information that is special to this RFP. You'll also note that it's in red ink, so that also is kind of a signal that you need to pay attention to what's written here. And please note that these requirements, when written in this manner, will supplement the generic requirements in the guidelines. So remember, those selection guidelines are generic for all MDOT RFPs. But if there's something in the specific RFP, that's information you need to pay attention to, because it may be a little bit different than what's in the generic boilerplate requirements. So the next 3 slides provide some highlights of this information and requirements. These are so important, we want to go through these a little more carefully. So note that even though the first page of the RFP indicated that this was going to be a Tier 3 selection, the proposal itself, the sample proposal, would be evaluated and scored as a Tier 1 selection under $150,000. So, as a Tier 3 solicitation, resumes are required, but the page limit is 3 pages, Tier 1, instead of 14. This is unique. You have to watch for these kinds of unique little nuances from time to time in RFPs. Now, again, this is only a sample, but it's something that may well come up on small business program opportunities where a large selection is being unbundled into several smaller contracts. Again, you have to read for understanding and ask clarifying questions during the proposal stage if you need to, but make sure you clearly understand the requirements of the proposal. And so we've highlighted here again that on this sheet, proposals up to 3 pages, not including key staff resumes and MDOT forms. And they're very careful to indicate that consultants are required to only use the number of pages required to provide the requested information. The next part of the form talks about understanding of service and innovation. Provide a description of the desired support service in order of priority to be provided under this contract. Identify MDOT service pre-qualification categories associated with the service to be provided. Describe how the contract will be used to create business growth opportunities and build capacity within the firm. And identify equipment and technology the consultant plans to provide under this contract. So these highlighted sections are important parts of this RFP that would need to be addressed in the proposal. In addition, under qualifications of team, the consultant shall provide the qualifications of the team and the organizational structure. And here's an important consideration. No sub-consultants will be allowed to participate as part of the team for this solicitation. So for this sample RFP, the proposer will need to self-perform. No sub-consultants. This next requirement says, identify specific and key staff that will be assigned to the project field office. Identify relevant and similar technical experience and capabilities, for example, industry certifications, field manager and construction inspection experience, etc. Again, referring back to the general description of the work on the page 1 of the RFP. Identify certifications which key staff either currently have or will obtain prior to providing construction support services under this contract. And then it references a section in the RFP entitled Minimum Qualifications for Key Consultant Personnel. We haven't seen that part of it yet, but it references it. So this page All these requirements on this page should all be addressed in the written proposal. The next sheet is a supplemental cover sheet, which is asking for some additional information. So take a look at that. It's requesting, again, the small business consultant to identify the desired support service areas, described as MDOT'S pre-qualification categories, in priority order, plus other information. So this is actually restating what was requested in the previous page, but providing you a form to do it with. So in essence, MDOT's asking for this twice. That means it's important. The last part of the RFP is usually, in this sample, is the scope of services, and this provides critical information on the who, what, why, when, and where of the services requested, the minimum requirements, the deliverables, plus any information on how the project is going to be evaluated and scored, if applicable. And again, anything written here on the RFP will supersede anything in the general requirements pages of the scope, or for that matter, in the guidelines. This is the meat and potatoes of the procurement document, the scope of work. So hopefully you've taken a few minutes to read through the sample RFP, and you've become familiar with the contents of the information at the beginning and then plus the scope of work. Now we're going to do a writing exercise that will help us apply the second principle of good proposal writing, and that is organizing for success. So in your workbook materials, you've got a workshop exercise sheet entitled Let's Get Organized. Pull that out, and so armed with that form plus your sample RFP, go ahead and fill in the data at the top of this and work your way down this worksheet, answering yes, circling yes or no, based on your understanding of the requirements in the sample RFP. Do the same for the top portion of the second page of the worksheet, answering the question, is there anything else in the RFP or scope that modifies or supplements the requirements noted on Form 5100B, page 1 or 2? We will review the answers shortly, but first we want to note some additional important requirements in assembling a responsive proposal based on our sample RFP. Let me pause right now while you do this exercise, and then we'll be back when you hit the resume button. All right, so now you've had a chance to sort of test your understanding of the requirements of the proposal. And again, we'll review the answers shortly. But let's go through this proposal elements piece on the worksheet. This is actually summarized, a summary form of what's on page 32 of MDOT's Service Vendor Selection Guidelines. It's the way in which the electronic file of the proposal is to be organized. And again, we've summarized it on this page. First, there's the Form 5100D, which is required. Then Form 5100J, if applicable, would come after that. And then any additional forms as noted in the RFP. Then Part 2, Understanding of Services, if required. 2A, Innovations, if required. Then Roman 3, Qualifications of Team. 3A, Structure of Project Team. And then sub 1, role of firms, sub 2, role of key personnel, 3B, organizational chart, and 3C, location, then followed by Roman 4, the quality assurance quality control plan, which is optional for Tier 3, and then 5, resumes of key staff. This is how MDOT wants your electronic proposal to be organized, and the proposals are required to be bookmarked in the PDF file according to this protocol. And again, these are summarized here, but they're noted in detail on page 32 of MDOT's Service Vendor Selection Guidelines. So these aren't changed very often. That's why we urge you to become familiar with these guidelines. They're updated online. These guidelines plus the actual RFP, again, constitute the requirements of the proposal. Then after you've assembled your PDF file, you need to name it in accordance with the conventions shown on page 32 of the guidelines. So you fill in the name of the file name for the sample proposal and the subject line of the email you would use if you were sending the sample RFP by email to MDOT. So go ahead and fill that in based on your understanding of what those requirements are. And then we'll go through this to see how we did. So now take the sheets out of your workshop materials that provide the answers in the worksheets, and then take a few minutes to check your own work to see how you did. We have filled it out for you, and again, this is a review of the sample RFP. Not every RFP is going to be like this, but we just want to get you practicing, organizing for success, understanding the requirements, and being better prepared to do this in response to an actual RFP. So now the next part of our proposal writing exercise 2, we're going to give you some practice in applying the third principle of asking the right questions. So one of the things that we have found helpful in the preparation of proposals is using the RFP to generate a list of questions to respond to when organizing yourself for the written part of the proposal. And so on the next 2 pages of your worksheet, entitled Proposal Writing Exercise, we've provided a sample list of questions and a template for your use and preparation. We're not going to have time to go through the entire worksheet and break it down in detail, but this is just to give you an idea of one way in which you could organize your materials, your thinking, in preparing to write a proposal. In this case, we know that from the sample RFP that there are 3 pages of a written proposal, maximum 3 pages, for you to provide the information that is required under understanding of service and innovations and qualifications of team, including an organizational chart. So again, this is intended to be a rough draft start, not a finished product. It's for your use only. So we would invite you to, and let me just say this, you may have other questions, better questions that you think would be better to answer as a foundation for your written proposal. These are just some that we offer as samples. The ones that we've highlighted on this worksheet are ones that we believe will track right back to the RFP in terms of what it is requiring. For example, question number 5 says, describe how this contract will be used to create business growth opportunities and build capacity within our firm. Now, why would that be a good question to answer in a written proposal? Well, in our opinion, the reason it's a good question to answer is because it's required. That question, that information was specifically required in the RFP, the sample RFP on, I believe it was page 4, the one entitled Additional Proposal Information to be Scored. And so a fantastic source of questions is the RFP itself. A couple of the other questions that we've highlighted here that we've suggested would be key questions for consideration. What will be our firm's approach to provide these services? List some strategies you intend to employ that will add value to MDOT and facilitate the goals of the project. What ideas do I have for providing these services more effectively and more efficiently in a way that saves time and money? That would be a way to describe some innovative technique or approach or technology that you'd like to propose for MDOT's consideration. Something that would differentiate your approach or your proposal. Also, under the qualifications of team section, it's very important to note the minimum requirements and to make sure that you document in your proposal that your team meets those minimum requirements. And so this is a worksheet entitled or developed to help you prepare, and we've used the principle of asking the right questions. And again, these are samples. You may have better questions that you think would help you better differentiate the strengths of your firm and your understanding of what the sample RFP is looking for. So take a few minutes to fill this worksheet out. We've also given you, again, one way of preparing to organize your team on an organizational chart and also understand the key staff requirement and provide information that MDOT on that sample RFP was asking for in terms of key staff. If the sample RFP, the way we read it, did not identify the key staff for you, and so if it doesn't, then the guidelines indicate that you have to identify those key staff and provide resumes. And as a reminder, resumes for key staff, there are requirements on the information that you provide, and those you can find in those selection guidelines. You only provide resumes for key staff, and those are limited to 2 pages per person. In terms of the organizational chart, that is basically a diagram of how your team will communicate with MDOT and how you will structure your team to provide those services. And so this worksheet just helps you prepare to put that in a written proposal. So you can go through this on the sample RFP and ask yourself these questions. Do I meet or exceed the requirements of the RFP. If the only information I had on my firm was what I was writing down, would I understand enough in order for me to be able to have my proposal evaluated? Am I proposing to add differentiating or unique value for MDOT in responding to this sample RFP? Is there anything I need to follow up on to make sure that my final written proposal is responsive? So again, these questions are based on the sample RFP provided in the workbook and not any actual RFP. Each RFP needs to be read for understanding and evaluated on its own merits. We've provided a sample template here to help you organize your response to this sample RFP. Now, in your workbook, we have provided you with a sample proposal, and it is just that, a sample. It's not intended to be an example of a winning proposal. It's intended to be an example of a responsive proposal. A winning proposal is the one MDOT will actually select based on an actual evaluation of an actual set of responsive and competitive proposals to an actual RFP. So again, this is just sample, this is just practice. And in this exercise, we're asking you to review the sample proposal against this checklist that we've provided to see that indeed this sample proposal is responsive. So this is a good time to hit the pause button, because for you to get value out of this exercise, you need to have reviewed the sample proposal. You have to have that sample proposal in front of you, and also this proposal responsiveness checklist. And we're recommending that to really reinforce what a responsive proposal looks like, go through that sample proposal, and then with this checklist in hand, answer the questions yes or no. Did the response include all required MDOT forms? Were the forms filled out completely? Were they signed by the right person? Did the response meet the submittal requirements? All these requirements are part of the test of responsiveness. And so, armed with the sample RFP, the sample proposal, and the proposal checklist, take some time and just practice checking for value to make sure that this sample proposal is responsive. So when you're ready to check your work, you can download and review the completed checklist with the correct answers highlighted and see how you did. So hopefully that exercise gave you some good practice in checking a completed proposal to make sure that it was responsive. Again, with that sample RFP, the sample proposal, and the sample checklist, those three tools give you a great opportunity to apply those three principles that we noted at the beginning of the presentation. Read for understanding. Make sure that you understand what that RFP is asking you to do. Then organize for success. Get all the documents in front of you. Make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you need to include in the written proposal. And then use the principle of asking the right questions to develop, to kind of break it down a little bit and make sure that you can put together your proposal in an organized fashion with all the right information. Understanding of service with innovations, organizational chart, qualifications of team. that you cover all of those bases. So that was the intent as we put together these workshop exercises, so you could apply those 3 principles. Now, we've also put together a few best practices on QBS proposals as we kind of wrap up this presentation. And this list is also included in your workbook. We want to share them with you here. You may or may not agree with these, and as you gain more experience in preparing proposals and getting proposals evaluated, you will develop your own sense of what works for you as you gain, again, more experience. So we suggest that you organize your proposal beginning with an outline so it can be easily reviewed. Put yourself in the position of the reviewer. And again, as we've demonstrated here, use a checklist to make sure you included everything required to be responsive and complete. Be proactive. Don't wait until the day before it's due. Start now. Look for the owner's high-level goals and show how your team would uniquely support those goals. Avoid cutting and pasting elements from the RFP when describing your understanding of service. Use your own words. Leverage your strengths. What uniquely qualifies your team for this opportunity? Make sure it's accurate, especially on resumes and past experience. Use pictures and graphics intentionally. What are you trying to communicate? And then invite review and feedback from a trusted peer or advisor. So we hope that this workshop has been helpful to you in preparing for future opportunities on the I-94 Small Business Program. This now wraps up our online proposal writing workshop. The next slide will give you some more information on where to go if you have questions, if you are interested in more information on doing business with MDOT, and also help you review the workshop materials and a list of frequently asked questions that came up during the workshop that we did live. So thank you for your time, and we hope this information has been helpful.